Welcome, everyone. My name is David Zimmerman. I'm the founder of DeFi University. Welcome to the Daily Market Wrap. This is the biggest charts in 30 minutes. And, in the interest of full transparency tonight, what I want to do with you guys is I want to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen in a second here, but I'm going to share and walk through all of my positions. And I want to just use this as an opportunity to talk through my mindset right now because I think, look, if anyone has experience as a trader, they will be able to understand just how valuable it can be to be able to, chat back and forth and, get input from other people. So I want to go ahead and add my screen to the stage here, and let's take a look. Let's take a look at TradingView. Alrighty, so we're going to pop into TradingView here. And the first thing that I want to just say is every chart that we look at today, I'm going to be completely open and transparent. I have a short position in, and irregardless of the bounce that we're getting today, I still think that if this is a Bitcoin bear market, that it's unlikely that the 60K level is the low. So my bias is still bearish. However, and I hope that the traders in the call will be able to resonate with this. Even though my bias is down, when my positions are showing me an unrealized loss, my self-talk can get kind of negative, telling myself that I'm stupid or I made a mistake or I'm wrong. And so what I'm doing here is I'm using this live call as an opportunity to talk through every single one of the positions that I'm short right now, every single one of the assets that I'm short, so that maybe this is valuable for someone else watching the call to see someone like myself who, look, I do this for a living. I've been through this many, many times before. I know what my mind is going to tell me. I know what my emotions are going to feel like, and I know how to react. But it's still valuable to be able to talk through it. So let's start over here with BTC. Here's Bitcoin. And this is, I marked the weekly low. So this is the weekly low right here for BTC. And that's the level that I'm going to be watching as important support. Now, this is a pretty decent bounce. And, one of the analysts that I follow pretty closely, Gareth Soloway over on YouTube, big shout out to Gareth Soloway, man. His TA he's very, very good. He is a very experienced technical analyst and a successful one as a trader. And what he was pointing out, you can definitely see it. This is a flag. This is a flag right here. And so Bitcoin, even though it is within a larger bearish trend, it put in a micro bull flag. And so this, if it continues, this could take Bitcoin all the way up to here. This would be like the level of resistance, I think, at like 80K or so. So that's actually a really decent bounce out of BTC if it can get up there. Now, I don't know whether it can get up there. Look, no one has a crystal ball. I certainly don't. I think I left it at the shop. It's getting worked on right now. But I see two levels of resistance for Bitcoin if this rally continues. The first one here is at 74.5. That's the level of support that was broken during that crash there a couple of weeks ago. Now, that will be the first level of resistance on the way up. And so let's just figure out how high is that. That's another, let's call it 8 percentage points on the way up. So 8 percentage points on the way up, that's a pretty decent rally, especially if you extend it from the lows of the week this past week. That would be a 13 or 14% rally. So that's a pretty decent counter trend rally out of Bitcoin. Now, let's say that it were to, extend all the way up to this level of resistance at, let's call it 80,000 half. So if we extend that up, that's a 17% move. That's a pretty big move. And, if we were to measure it all the way from the weekly low this past week, that's 23%. Now, for me, I'm using very little leverage. So my stops, I think that my stops are above here, above this level. I'm using like 1.3x leverage, I think, 1.3. So something like a 70% move, and I would face liquidation, but my stops are set much closer than that. So my intention for those short positions that I entered was to be able to hold through volatility because I believe, and when I say volatility, I mean upside volatility. My intention when I opened those positions was to be able to hold through upside volatility. I expected to be wrong on direction. I thought that Bitcoin and alts would actually bounce against me, but over the next several weeks or months, I really don't believe that Bitcoin can just rally even up to 80K. Like that would really surprise me, a rally to 80K. I think Bitcoin maybe is able to get up to 74. That's like a maybe. But if it does, I would expect that to be some resistance. So I'm still quite bearish here. This has really changed nothing when it comes to my longer term outlook. It's just, dealing with it emotionally, dealing, even a small loss, like, even dealing with a small loss. It's not necessarily the size of the loss for me anyway. It's the emotion and it's the self-talk. It could be a $10 loss. It's if I'm not right. I derive value in myself for being right. And that's one of my flaws as a trader, but I talk about it. That's fine. So I am a bear here. I'm a Bitcoin bear. And I would not be surprised to see it touch 50K over the next several months by the end of this bear cycle. Maybe it puts in a trough around 50K. And so even if we get a rally, that would be a counter trend rally, a rally from, where we're trading now at 68.8 up to 74. That is a counter trend rally. So these bear market rallies can be very sharp. They definitely can be. So that's the difficulty. Even when you're using very little leverage, a sharp rally, like in Tau earlier today, for example, can be painful. So let's take a look at Ethereum. Here's ETH. And ETH is really doing its best to put in a higher low. Let's go ahead and zoom in here. So this, let me go ahead and remove that. There we go. And let's get a little bit closer. So this is a higher low. Here's the lower low, here's the higher low. So just in the macro, or in the micro, excuse me, just the last couple of days, this looks like, again, some type of a flag. So if we just draw this in real quick, let me grab my brush. Here's the pole and here's the flag. So if this were to continue, it would probably bring ETH up above 2120. And that was the level of resistance on the last counter trend rally for Ethereum. So if 2120 breaks to the upside, and if Bitcoin is actually able to get up to 74.5, then maybe ETH is able to rally up towards 2600. Maybe. But, in my opinion, I think that it's a bear market. And so even if there is a sharp rally, 30% from the current price, that seems like a bit much. Maybe, if we measure it from the bottom of this past week's candle, which if we zoom out, you'd be able to see, but it's right here, 19, a little bit above 1900. So that would be a 40% rally up to like significant technical resistance for ETH. That's a big rally. Now, could it do that over the course of a week or two? Of course it could. Of course. And so that's why it's decision time for me because, number one, I'm not going to make any decisions right now today because I know that when my emotional state is not right, I can't all of a sudden make changes to my plan. Like you can't do that. So I'm going to be sitting on my hands here, but, I'm definitely thinking to myself, oh man, what if this is able to get up to 2650? If ETH can get up to 2650, that would be no good for my short positions. So I've really got to take that into account here. But longer term, like over the next couple of weeks, even, like we could get a sharp rally and that's it. But, or things could continue lower. I don't have a crystal ball here, but I do think that the more likely direction for Ethereum is for this trend, this downtrend to continue during the rest of the Bitcoin bear market. And so that's why I think that 1600 and maybe even 1000 is more likely for ETH first than 3400 is. So, or even 27 up here. I think 16 comes before 27. That's just me. So let's go ahead and take a look at Solana, SOL. So, Solana broke down into this big zone, and this is that 95 level that was support. But if we go ahead and move it down and take a look at last cycle, this level here, right around 75, 76, that was support last cycle. When it broke, Sol made a straight shot down to 37. So, what do we see this cycle? Well, instead of that $76 level being the important horizontal support, we've got this $95, $96 level as the important horizontal support. And we've gotten the first breakdown. We're getting that bounce. And so this bounce here out of Sol, again, very similar type of flag. So if we that's a big bull hammer too, big hammer. So big hammer candle, and there's the flag. Now, importantly, flags are always downsloping. They're always downsloping within the body or within the candle of the pole, or candles plural of the pole. So that is definitely a bull flag, and we're getting a little bit of a push, but this really needs to continue for Sol to have a shot at getting up above 96. So trading right now at 84.30, to get up to 96 and really clear that level of resistance, Solana would need to pump by an additional 12, 13%. And to get to like a real significant level of horizontal resistance up above, here's that breakdown. You see that? That is a big breakdown right there. And that started the move all the way down to 67 on Sol. For price to get all the way back up to the breakdown, that would be an additional 37% on the upside. Is that likely? Well, I think only if Bitcoin is able to break above 75K. If Bitcoin can push above 75K, then sure, the more volatile asset Solana could make a move up to 116. That is definitely in the cards, or possible. Do I think that that's likely, however? No, I don't, because I just don't think that Bitcoin has that much rally in it. It's a bear market, and bear market rallies are very sharp and also quite short. And so I do not expect Bitcoin to be able to make it up to 80. And since I don't think Bitcoin can make it up to 80, I think that it's unlikely that Solana will be able to make it up to 115, 116. So that's where I place my stops. And I'm not using much leverage here at all. I think it's 1.3. So, I can definitely weather this, but I don't want to. It's painful. They say that your first loss is your best loss. And I'm going to sit on my hands. That's what I'm going to do. But, I'm just talking through it. That's all. So I've got a plan. I'm sticking to my plan. I'm sitting on my hands. But man, when it comes to Tau, what a rally out of Tau. Let's take a look at this on the weekly. So let me go ahead and zoom in here. We got to take a look at Tau on the weekly, because this is a big, big hammer candle that is shaking up in Tau. And Tau is sitting basically at some resistance right now. So 179, I think that on the day, if we zoom into the daily now, on the daily, it was plus 15% or so, 14.5% today for Tau. So really, really big counter trend rally. And it looks like, maybe we get some continuation. So, there needs to be a leader for the altcoin market. And if Ethereum is not going to lead, then maybe Tau leads. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and see what Tau ETH looks like right now? So yeah, look at that. So there's Tau outperforming ETH on the upside. You see that? Last couple of days, Tau just pushing higher against ETH. So where could Tau go from here? Well, the first stop is going to be the breakdown right at 207. So if we take a look, see, there's the support, there's the breakdown. And the breakdown also brought us below 170, which was, important support from back in April of last year. So the support was 207 on the breakdown. It became 170. Now that we're back up above 170, this 207 level, which was support, became resistance. This is going to be resistance on the way up. So 207 would be the first level of resistance. Tau currently just barely pushing above this trend line resistance here. So I can go ahead and remove that, and we can just focus on 206, 207 for tau. But if that breaks, if tau's able to get up above 207, well, then where's the next level of resistance? Well, let's go ahead and see if we can draw that in. I'm going to grab that trend line tool right here, and I just want to drag this down like so. And now we've got that confluence. So you see we've got the horizontal resistance and we've got the trend line resistance right here. So that 207 level, that is 207, 208, that is really important resistance for tau. If it's able to get above that, then it probably moves to 300. So that would be, in line with tau's volatility. It can definitely double over the course of a couple of days. It's done that in the past, going from at the trough 250 to at its peak, in just a couple of sessions. That was the flash crash, all the way up to nearly 500. So, tau is an extremely volatile alt, and it would be normal for it to put in such an outsized move. So, if we just go ahead and measure that real quick, from where it's trading up to the first resistance is 17%, all the way up to the next level of resistance, probably 35%, and then up here, 60%. So it really depends. I think it depends on what Bitcoin does. If Bitcoin continues to rally, then maybe some of these alts also continue to rally. Let's take a look at SUI. So SUI, again, many of these alts, most of them, not all of them, but many of them, have put in similar type of bull flag patterns here. So if I just grab my brush, you can see the big hammer. See that big hammer candle? That basically makes up, that's the flash, that's the crash. So that's the pull, and there's the flag. And importantly, the flag is down sloping. And so that's just a short-term continuation pattern. So if we just go ahead and grab an arrow tool here so that we can mark this. So here's the flagpole, here's the flag. The continuation should bring us above the top of the pole, which is at $1.02. If the top of the pole breaks, then we can start looking at $1.30, simply because SUI is extremely volatile. It is a high volatility altcoin. So if we go ahead and measure that, that's 35% from the current price. If we measure from the weekly lows, that's 48%. That seems about right to me for a bear market rally out of a high volatility alt after just getting hammered from, at its highs $2 all the way down to 79 cents. So a 50% retrace would make sense. I just don't want to see that. I don't want to hold through that at all. Oh, I guess I might have no choice. Let's take a look at XRP, because the reason why I say I might have no choice is because my bias is down. So I think that this is a Bitcoin bear market rally that we're seeing out of alts. And if the rally continues, I'm just trying to project where could resistance be. So a 50% rally from trough to peak out of SUI, that would be in line with its greater than 100% volatility. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that, although I don't want to see that. Now here's XRP. I know I might have been a little bit bearish on XRP in the past. Let's go ahead and take a look at this nice pull here and flag. Again, another bull flag out of this alt. And so if this continues, the first level of resistance would be, the highs from the bounce after the crash. And we could just go ahead and measure that. So up to that is 10%. So that first level of resistance, 10% away. But then you've really got to start thinking about $1.75 or so. So that's another 25% to the upside from the current price. Now, if you measure from the trough, let's just measure from the weekly candle trough. That would be a bounce in XRP of 30%, greater than 30%, just up to resistance. But again, the only way that happens is if Bitcoin actually continues to rally too. And is that likely? It kind of looks like it could be up to 74.5 or so. It seems like it makes sense. Let's take a look at ARB, but that's within a much larger bearish pattern. That's the thing. Now, this is actually a bullish pattern, this descending wedge pattern out of ARB. And ARB starting to coil and turn back to the upside here. So if I just zoom in, notice that same exact bull flag pattern. There's the pull and the flag, and we're starting to get the push up. So that is the bull flag on ARB. Let's just go ahead and measure this too. So if we measure from, let's say the weekly low, all the way up to the first significant level of resistance, I'm going to go ahead and mark this with a horizontal right there. That's a 62% move. Now, this is an extremely high volatility alt. So could it make that move? Sure. But is ARB likely to outperform other higher quality alts like Tau? I don't think so. I mean, could it pop like that? Sure could. But yeah, if I was going to choose an alt to be long, it would not be Arbitrum. It would probably be something that seems to be leading, like Tau or maybe Aave. In fact, I'm going to push Aave up a little bit higher here. So Aave, after this massive correction, going from $387 all the way down to 93, that is a massive destruction in value for Aave, for the Aave token. And importantly, also breaking below this level of trendline support, putting in this breakdown here. Now, it looks as though Aave is back above that level. And so that makes it now, it's basically clinging to it. So if Aave is going to continue to rally, the first level of resistance on the upside would come in at like 144-ish or so. So if we measure that from the current price, that's going to be 21%. But if we measure from the lows of the week, that's 35%. That's a decent bear market rally. And, Aave breaking back up above resistance, that's why I mentioned it in the same breath as Tau, because that's some relative outperformance compared to many other altcoins. So if I was going to, maybe flip the cards around, I am not, but I'm just saying, for someone else who might not have any positions open, probably it makes sense to, use a tight stop and try and see if you could get some of this move in these alts on the upside, but only if Bitcoin continues to rally. That would be, the only way that the alts continue to rally. If Bitcoin just turns around and gives it back, then these alts all go the same way that Bitcoin does. Let's take a look at BNB. So BNB here, I continue to think that BNB is a sell, but it is doing its best to hold this level. And let's just see, can we maybe improve this trend line at all? Is there an opportunity to improve this? So no, maybe not, but I'm just going to go ahead and use this. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up a little bit. So there we go. We've got this level of support here. There's one, and there's the next touch. And I anchored it here to these lows from back in March of 2024. So if we just take a look, this is clearly supported, and it was actually a double test. So if we just take a look here at this double test, looks kind of like a double bottom almost, just on the micro. So there's the support, there's the retest, a slightly higher low. And again, just like just about every other alt, we've got this bull flag. So this is a little bit of a deeper bull flag, but it's still within the candle. So, or within the pole, excuse me. So, it does look like that BNB is putting in the weakest bounce of the alts so far, but it's importantly holding above support. So if it's able to hold above support here, then maybe it's got some more room to the upside. And because this drawdown was so sharp, just taking place over the course of 2 days here, and it's just basically a week, big drawdown over the course of a week, we might see a bounce out of BNB, and that first real significant level of resistance would be 790, but really weak performance today from BNB compared to other altcoins. Let's take a look at Arrow. So Arrow, I've made no secret of my dislike for the Arrow token. It's a reward token. And I expect that even if it bounces, that it ends up moving back to the downside. So what I see here is this level of resistance right there at 40 cents. And we've got support where Arrow basically bounced from. But let's just go ahead and let me just make sure. So the low of this candle is 27.41, and the low of this one is 27.70. So Arrow put in a lower low. So not many alts put in lower lows compared to their, February 6th crash lows. So, or that was basically the bottom for many alts, Feb 6. But Arrow actually put in a slightly lower low, which is bearish. And if we just zoom out just a little bit, I mean, this is just straight down, so even if this bounces, 40 cents looks like the first level of resistance. And so from the weekly lows, that would be a bounce of 45%. Big bounce. Is that likely? Sure. As long as Bitcoin continues to bounce, as long as Bitcoin can make it up to at least its level of resistance at 75, well, then Arrow and all the other alts can bounce too. So I remain short Arrow. Now, Fartcoin, I've got a short position on Fartcoin. And, this one definitely bounced today. But, compared to many other alts and for a meme coin, the bounce is pretty weak. So let's just go ahead and check in on Fartcoin. Where is the first level of resistance? I mean, you could say maybe something like that at 24 cents. You could also say right here at 26 cents. Why don't we go ahead and zoom out to a weekly and see if there's anything else that we see there? Okay, so on the weekly on Fartcoin, let me just go ahead and bring this into view. I'm looking for another level of resistance on the way up. And, it's kind of hard to see anything other than this zone here. So I'm just going to use this and throw down a horizontal right there. So 26 cents on Fartcoin. And if we zoom back in and then measure from the current price, or in fact from the weekly lows, that would be a 55% move. So that seems to make sense. But if this is the first level of resistance, then that would be a 45% move. That's about in line with all the other alts. So, should we expect more upside from altcoins? Well, hard to say. Really depends on what the king does. And as long as Bitcoin continues to rally, this is just one day. It's great to see a little rally if you're long. I'm not long, I'm short. But just one day of rally here, this could continue through the weekend for sure. Let's finish up with equities. And I want to begin by taking a look at the MOVE index. So let's invert this scale here, because MOVE, this is bond market volatility. This has been extremely inversely correlated with S&P, with the S&P 500. So take a look at that inverse correlation, extreme inverse correlation there. And notice we've got bond market vol starting to tick up. And so if we've got bond market vol ticking up, see, bond market vol ticking up, that could mean that we might get at least some volatility out of equities. Here's the VIX, VIX, put in a hammer. This is a bearish hammer. Volatility is mean reverting. And so we might see this compress next week. That would mean equities up. So let's just take a look here at the S&P futures, rolling over, potentially putting in, and this is what I saw from Gareth Soloway, a head and shoulders pattern, potentially, but you need the breakdown for it to trigger. We haven't seen that yet. And here's the NASDAQ. We got that level of resistance, the rejection, and the double top, just like we got last year. And last year in late February, this same exact pattern presaged a leg down out of the NASDAQ. So, could we see NASDAQ down, stocks down next week, and that drags digital assets down? Sure, of course we could. It's been very interesting to see what's happened with yields. Now, why do you think that yields are pulling back so sharply and yet equities are not rallying? So this is like a classic risk-off behavior. You got equities, throughout the end of this week, giving back much of their gains intraday, starting the day green and then giving it back throughout the rest of the day. And then the bid in bonds. So stocks down, bonds up, and gold up. That is a classic risk off trade. So if I think that, look, we've got Bitcoin just getting shellacked, software with Oracle getting hammered and IGV getting hammered. So software getting sold, intraday rallies rolling over in the S&P and the NASDAQ, and bond market vol starting to tick up. We've got yields really pushing lower in a hurry, and inflows into bonds. So bonds bid, gold bid, and equities rolling over, that's risk off to me. So even if there's more rally left in the tank out of Bitcoin, I think this rolls over too. And the trigger could be, it doesn't have to be a big correction out of stocks. It could be a small correction, but it's about time. Because if we take a look at these Mag 7 items just real quick, here's Tesla. Tesla, running into resistance, bouncing today, but it has broken resistance or broken support, excuse me, and been rejected at resistance. Same with Google. Google broke down and has started to push lower. Same thing with NVIDIA, having found resistance up here at the top of this channel. Maybe it pushes down towards the bottom of the channel. Again, I'm not talking about any crash in any of these stocks, just continued downside over the next couple of weeks. Take a look at Microsoft, MSFT. Microsoft clinging to support. If it breaks, then it goes to 350. Take a look at Apple. Big rejection, near the all-time highs for Apple, and straight down, basically like 8%, 8.5% over the last 2 days. Big moves down in Apple. So that's one to watch. We look at Amazon gapping lower after earnings, making a move towards long-term trendline support. We take a look at Meta. Here's Meta, gap up after earnings, give it all back, and then continue lower. Here's support. So support is lower. And Oracle just compressing below resistance and above support. It's going to be decision time pretty soon for Oracle. So now that we've had a chance to take a look at all the Mag 7 items and equities and digital assets, you got to ask yourself, how high can Bitcoin go? And if it continues to rally over the weekend, will it be able to hold on to those gains, or is this just a quick trade for a couple of days? Well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. Thanks everyone so much for joining the call live. I really appreciate all of you. It's always a great time to be able to present this material live. If you find value in this, please feel free to take a look at DeFiUniversity.xyz, a ton of free educational material there. Take a look at the school, school.com/DeFi University, a bunch of free educational material there. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a great weekend.